So your objectives in this first section, you want to describe the roles of producers and consumers in ecosystems, and you want to compare photosynthesis to chemosynthesis. Like I said, you already know what this is and what this is. What is a producer? What is a consumer? What is it?
Producer creates its own food, consumers eat producers.
So these things make food.
Or the products of the consumer.
These ones eat it. So yes, the consumers can eat a producer, but consumers can eat other consumers too. We'll talk about that in the next section specifically because there's different trophic levels, different levels of being a consumer. But already you know that much, so this section's pretty easy. And then we talked about photo and chemosynthesis before. What did photo mean?
Light,
What did chemo mean?
chemicals.
So you already know a major difference there. Photosynthesis uses light energy to make food. So anything that does photosynthesis, would it be a producer or a consumer?
Producer.
A producer, because it makes its own food through this process. But some producers are actually chemosynthesizing organisms. They use chemical energy instead of light energy because they live in places where there is no light. Right, a lot of that chemosynthesis is done at the bottom of the ocean where there's not enough light. That light doesn't actually get down to the bottom of the ocean. So they have to use other sources of energy to produce their own food, to support entire ecosystems of consumers down there too. So this section is going to be pretty fast. We just got to go through the definitions here. Can you guys read that all right? I decided to go with another clashing color to really confuse you guys and make you want to fight me too. And we got the North Carolina blue up here.
I'm gonna have to leave
That's just done. So producers are organisms that get their energy from non-living resources. So a tree, the grass outside, they get their energy from where? The sun, right? That light energy is non-living, obviously. It never was living.
Typically cool if we could not eat food.
They did have this as well. Make their own food, just to remember. That would be pretty awesome if we could just go out in the sun and not have to eat anything.
I'd still want to eat.
I'd probably still want to eat too, but maybe we could have the option. You could snack, but you could also have
switch.
a lunch.
Also called.
Or one in a bowl.
But producers are also called autotrophs. That word is probably new. I don't know if you've used that one before.
In our packet we did.
Yeah, your packet probably saw it. Auto means self. Troph means eat. It basically means feeding, actually. So autotroph, self-feeding, they make their own food. This word is interchangeable for this word, so sometimes I'll say producers, sometimes I'll say autotrophs. They mean the same thing. They both make their own food. They're either going to do chemosynthesis or photosynthesis. Most of the ones you're familiar with do photosynthesis, not chemosynthesis, but we'll get to that. Consumers, organisms that eat other living or once living resources. It's a very technical definition there. Basically, when I say non-living resources for the autotrophs, for the producers, that sunlight, like I said, that was never alive. The sun is not alive. There's just a nuclear reaction happening in the core that's releasing a lot of energy that they can use. But you also eat things that are non-living, because unless you actually take the bite directly out of the cow, I'm guessing it was dead before you ate the steak. So it's just kind of a technical issue there. Make sure you understand this stuff's non-living, but it was also never living, right? It was never alive. Versus this stuff, right, it was once living when you're eating it. Some things actually do eat other organisms alive. A fish will swallow up another fish alive, right, and just eat it from there. But it's just being technical there, right? So I know the steak was probably dead before you ate it. but it was once living, came from a living thing, so you would be a consumer. Consumers are also called heterotrophs. Hetero means different, so literally this means different feeding, which is kind of grammatically incorrect, but at least you can kind of get the idea. It feeds off of different organisms, other organisms. So heterotroph's just a different word for consumer. I could flip-flop those two words, they mean the same thing. Everybody good with this stuff?
Yeah.
Next slide. Okay, so this is actually a whiteboard question. Did everybody grab a marker? If not, come get one real quick, please.
Jared got one. So the answer has to be in one of those.
I've asked this question before, so if you're thinking I'm trying to ask a trick question, you might be right, but I told you that. It's not really a trick.
Zach, I need that.
You ran on the front of your It should erase. You got that clear plastic on front, right? Where's your binder?
On the floor right there.
Just wondering, because you need your whiteboard.
Yeah, I was waiting to get a marker.
No.
Alright, so this first one shouldn't take us very long. It's very, very easy because we've answered this question like 5 different times already, I think, in this class.
Yeah.
Not literally, but you know what I mean. So it was a trick question the first time I asked it, but it really shouldn't be a trick anymore. You should know the answer. When I say ultimate source, look, I might not be talking about the things that are actually on the screen. I might be talking about something that's implied. So it looks like everybody's on the right track. Some of us are even answering in Spanish, which is great.
I drew a picture.
So, what was the ultimate source of energy, Jared?
Soul.
El Sol.
No, it's still Latin.
Which means the sun. And I would prefer if you said sunlight.
I don't know the Latin word.
That's a little bit more technical. I'd actually need that energy coming from the sun, not the sun itself. So, same answer it was a long time ago. It's still sunlight because that producer had to get its energy from somewhere. Remember, the answer isn't always sunlight. But since this is grass, it's sunlight. If it was some chemosynthesizing organism, it might actually be chemical energy instead of sunlight that it uses. But I think so you guys get the gist of it. Chemosynthesis. Process in which an organism produces food using chemicals. And then this is our other whiteboard situation for the day. This should be pretty easy for you to do, but you're supposed to compare and contrast those two things. So either like a Venn diagram or maybe with 3 columns, whatever you want to do. These two things are different, but they also have some things in common. So you need something in each column on your whiteboard before we can go through with this. How are they different? How are they alike? You should be able to get a lot of things. We're going to add some extra stuff that maybe you don't know already, but you should be able to do a lot of things just right off the bat. Or at least one thing for each column. Good start.
Not salty.
Oh, what you got?
Oh, it's new bowl.
I don't know what you want to do with this.
Sit. Exactly what I mean. Just trying to confuse you.
One uses.
Okay.
Jesus Christ.
That would be what
At least I can get some of that.
Now you gotta talk to lower voice.
As soon as I can get some
Versus one of which is this,
baseline of it.
what's the lower voice?
The chain. Make a product.
To make.
Make a product. Produce energy. Food.
Make their own food.
Okay, so I'm guessing you got at least something in each column. I hope so, at least. It doesn't matter what you do first, either alike or different. What's one thing you got in there, Mary? Okay, so this means light. So it's going to use that light energy to power that process.
What's that say?
Light energy.
Okay, thank you.
Versus, Sarah, what's another thing I could put up here? This would use chemical energy.
That's my arm pad.
So you got two differences there, obviously. One's using light energy, the other one's using chemical energy.
I got the next one.
Versus, anything else we can put up here, Zach?
They both make food.
They both make food. What does that make both of them?
Producers.
So maybe you should say that they're both producers. What else could you say? Because I don't have to say producer. I could also say
Consumer.
No, and
Autotroph.
autotroph.
I said that.
So those are just some basics. Those are things that we already knew before we started notes today. But there are actually some other weird different things up here on the board. So I'm not going to draw this again because I already have it. Actually, since I'm recording, I better write it on the board, although I'll just talk about it as I write it. Let's see if I can read it.
Recording?
Yeah.
For who?
Okay, so
There's not in biology, Jake.
one reaction looks like this. So what was this stuff called?
glucose.
Glucose. And what,
Sugar.
which process was this?
Fermentation.
This is photosynthesis.
Oh.
Because I got that light energy coming in. Why might I make that arrow green?
That's not.
Because of chlorophyll.
Because chlorophyll absorbs that light so that we can do this whole thing. Because you had that electron transport that you had to power, all sorts of crazy stuff that thankfully we don't have to do on this test. But this is the process for photosynthesis versus chemosynthesis that looks quite a bit different.
Where are you supposed to write this down at?
You don't have to have it if you don't want to, but it could help you. Oops. All right, so this one looks a little bit different. The energy is supposed to come from what in chemosynthesis?
Chemical.
A chemical. And the chemical the energy comes from is actually this dihydrogen sulfide. But otherwise, can you see some similarities?
Everything else. Just the O2 to begin with.
So both make glucose, right?
We did not mean to do that.
We already said that. They both make food. But we could be more specific. They do actually both make glucose.
You could go back to that.
What else is similar?
It already has its own oxygen. It doesn't release oxygen.
That actually makes it different, right?
Yeah.
So in one, the oxygen is produced, which is awesome for us, right? In the other one, the oxygen is actually being consumed, which means that that oxygen wouldn't be there for you to use. So that would be kind of detrimental to the situation you want. But anything else? Anything
What's that?
similar? Anything different?
Is that an S, I take it?
Yeah, it's so
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an H2SO4. That is kind of different, isn't it? And I actually labeled it over here. That stuff. Oops. Let's use black. Is sulfuric acid. Do you know what sulfuric acid could be found in?
Oranges.
By any chance? No.
No.
Uric acid, hydrochloric acid.
Fingernail polish.
What has acid in it? That's it's in your car.
Battery.
That's battery acid, sulfuric acid. Pretty caustic, nasty stuff.
Oh yeah.
If you spilled any of this on your skin, it can eat through your tissue very quickly. Do you think that sounds like something that a living thing would want to produce?
No.
It just
If
burns
your
through
cells
your
were producing sulfuric acid, you would be eaten from the inside out by that caustic material. So it's weird that the chemosynthesizing organisms make that because they'd have to deal with that. Obviously, they've adapted to deal with it, but it's really weird. This thing also, by the way, is extremely toxic. If you were to breathe in that gas, it'd kill you. Dihydrogen sulfide is not a good gas for you. It'll kill you. So they have these two extremely dangerous chemicals that are a part of this process, but they can still deal with that. That's what makes these so weird. We never even thought that they could exist until obviously we discovered them, because they live in extreme conditions that just make no sense, considering most living things wouldn't be able to handle those conditions. It's also really, really hot near those hydrothermal vents, so there's a lot of heat involved in this process as well. It's near boiling water. Would you survive in that?
Oh.
No. So there's three different things that would kill you in this process, but it still makes that one thing that you would want, that glucose, that sugar, that food. So it is really, really different, but it's also kind of has the same goal. It even uses the same reactants as far as carbon dioxide is your carbon source. You still use water. You're probably going to split that water for electrons in some process, some way, somehow. But this stuff's pretty nasty. That sulfuric acid is. The dihydrogen sulfide is toxic. That heat would kill you all by itself if it was that hot in your environment. So they are really weird, just so you know. So there are probably some other things we could put in here, but those really wouldn't end up being on the test, so I wouldn't freak out about it too much.